So welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Taylor Clem. I am with you at IFAS Extension, Nassau County. I'm our horticulture agent and our county extension director. And this is part of our just monthly horticulture programming. So I'm excited to bring this to you all today. Our program today, is the perfect time of year because, summer is waning, kind of, the temperature's not quite there yet. But we start to think, if you're interested in vegetable gardening, now's the time to start thinking about your vegetable gardening. I mean, we can grow things all year long in Florida, but the summer period is the most intense part of our growing year for a lot of our fruits and vegetables. So the limitation, we're kind of limited on what we can do in the garden, a little bit, not much, just a little bit. But when we start coming into this fall period, we start to have a huge diversity and selection of the things that we can grow. So if you're from, say, like up north somewhere, you're used to growing all summer long. Well, it's kind of flipped. We now can grow a lot of those things all like our fall and winter and spring period. So it's really exciting. We'll go through some of these, like the basic foundations of starting gardens and your fruits and vegetable gardens in your yard, or different ways that you can produce food in your yard, no matter if you have 100 acres or you live in an apartment. There's ways that you can produce and grow your own fruits and vegetables. So we'll go ahead and get moving. So I like to start every program I do with these essential questions. So these essential questions, essentially, how do I plan and design my vegetable garden? Obviously, it's going to be important to think about its location, what goes into maintaining it, or how you're just going to build it and put it together, or what are you going to do? So how do I plan and design my vegetable garden? What are common vegetables and fruits to grow in Nassau County, or this like North Florida or South Georgia, if you're coming from Camden County. But and then also, how do I manage my vegetable garden? Because we can build and have these amazing gardens, but it's going to be important to think about what's that best management practices and how can we make sure that we have the edge up on our maintenance. So in the garden we grow, we're going to cover these three big things: is the planning and designing vegetable gardens, the fall plantings, and garden management. I had a slide did I skip one? There it was. Yeah, I skipped this. I didn't realize. I apologize. But tell me first, before we jump into everything, why do you like to garden, or why do you want to begin gardening? What intrigues you the most about it? Peaceful. Nice. Yes, it's peaceful. And you can put your comments in the chat box as well. It's just amazing. It's not necessarily just like, oh, I'm growing food, but it's just like, I planted something and I sowed it, and then all of a sudden it's growing and you're watching this proliferate. Yeah, provide food. That's an amazing aspect of it as well. So what other things do you? Taste great. Yeah, like I ate something right out of the garden the other day. Just rinsed it off, cleaned it, and like, that distinct flavor of something that you eat that you get right out of the garden that you don't get from any grocery store. You can get it from the farmer's market because they're probably harvesting things that day. But like that earthy taste that you can get with a lot of your stuff, there's nothing, I think, that compares to that. That's just a wonderful thing. So it's providing food for family. That's a great one. We grow some stuff at my house, some fruits and vegetables, not a bunch, but like I have 2 young boys. So part of that is like, I'm helping teach them these skills, but also it's giving me an opportunity to spend time with them, and like when my son and I harvested the potatoes that we planted last year, he was pumped, of course, we're just like dumped out a big thing of soil and he was digging around on a tarp finding potatoes. I mean, what was more fun than that? So, but it's like, say that again. French fries. Oh yeah. Well, I always like to joke, if you're gardening with youth or kids, potatoes are the gateway to gardening, because potatoes are pretty easy to grow, and then they make all the tasty things that kids love: French fries, potato chips, So it's kind of like a cool thing. It's like, yeah, we can, like, if you have a deep fryer or air fryer or whatever it is, like, let's harvest these, let's wash them up, let's make French fries or potato chips or whatever it is, it's such a cool experience to have. But, that's a neat thing when we think about why is gardening important to us. Why do we like gardening? Why are you interested in gardening? We get to provide food. We get to share it with our family. It's an experience. And I think when I say the terms in the garden we grow, it's like in the garden we grow food. Yes, but in the garden we grow as an individual, as a family, as a community. So there's a more of a bigger social aspect to it. And so many of the comments that everybody has mentioned, it involves family, that experience. Having the food come out of it is a benefit as part of these experiences. So that's one thing I really like about, community gardening or just gardening in general. Like if you go back in time and you think about victory gardens during World War II, that was a community-driven need. And it was built around that community's need to help support, everybody else in the community, help make sure we had good food supplies for soldiers overseas, et cetera. So it was community driven and it had a huge impact socially, like a good impact socially. But anyways, so before I jump too far off topic, let's get back on track. So as part of that, we want to share. We want to be able to grow fruits and vegetables in our own yard, be able to share those with others, and have those different experiences. So we're going to talk about that planting and designing, those different fall plantings, an emphasis on fall plantings. We'll talk about some of the other things, and then also basic garden management. So when we're thinking about location, some of the things we need to first think about is, okay, where do I have ample amount of sunlight? You do want to have about 6 to 8 hours of sun. Full sun, most ideal. You need to have it near a water source. So you need to get water to it somehow, whether you have an irrigation line that's running out to it, you have a hose bib, wherever you have water available, because it is a nuisance if you have to run a long PVC pipe in order to get water to your garden, which I've seen before. People build a bed and they're like, oh no, we got to get water to it. But sometimes it's a necessity because it might be the only place that you have full sun available. But anyway, so ideally near a water source or easy way to get water to it. Try to keep it away from buildings or competing trees. Sometimes, it just might be near buildings. But a big thing that relates to is just shade, just making sure that it's not out competing or fighting for sunlight. And then as well as you need well-drained soils. So your plants are going to really like that moisture, but they're not going to want to have like super wet feet all the time. They're thirsty, but they don't want to hold on to that water too long. So when we think about sunlight, we think about where is the sun going to be? So obviously in the summer, our sun's going to be sitting overhead, more direct overhead. But of course, in the cooler times of year, obviously the sun is starting to move to its lower point in the sky because we passed, the summer equinox. The longest day, the sun starts coming back down. So usually our sun's going to sit lower in the winter. So it always sits lower in the winter, not usually. Sorry. It's always sitting, so far. If it doesn't, something beyond our control is happening. But so when the sun begins to sit lower in the fall, in the winter, we need to think about how that shade starts to change as the seasons change. So it's going to be really important. Usually if you're on the southern aspect or the southern side of the building in the home, that's going to be most ideal. So you really need to think about how that sun position is going to change throughout the year so you can better anticipate your sun patterns. Because I'd hate for you to like, oh, look, I got amazing sun, right now in August. Cool. Come January, it's like shade all day. So you just got to be very aware of how that sun position changes and that seasonality with that sun position. So there are different types of gardens. So you have the very traditional garden, like in ground. And in Florida, you can definitely do just traditional in-ground gardening where you have the space, you just kind of remove your grass or remove whatever is there and you start planting in ground. That is definitely tougher of these three types of gardens. So that traditional gardening, works wonderful. You can produce a lot because you're going to have more space. Raised bed gardening, that is, the most common, especially for, residents. How many of you have gardens already? And if so, are you using raised bed or in ground? You have both raised bed and in ground. Nice. All the above. That's even better. We have container. Wonderful. Container gardens are wonderful because you can grow so many things in container. So if you only have a patio, it works well. Or if you just don't have the capacity to be able to maintain something in a raised bed, but you can have a couple of containers on a patio or outside, it's wonderful. So, these traditional gardening method is great. Raised bed gardening is easier because you can be still very productive, but then you can also have better control over your soils, which you don't necessarily have always with traditional gardening unless you're doing a lot of amendments throughout the year, which is definitely possible. And then container gardening is great just because you have flexibility. And if, all of a sudden your plant isn't getting enough sun, you can move the whole container, so that's a definite benefit. So these are the different types of gardening, and you can have one or all of the combination of the three. So with raised beds, at least, we always want to think about what's the best way for building them. Yes, they're easy. If you need to build one of your own, you can get kits, or you can just go get lumber, slap them together. It's like good enough. Anything that holds soil pretty much is going to be appropriate. But I always recommend, if you're new to it, start small, because if you just have like a 4x4 bed or even a 2x2 bed, you're going to have an unbelievably productive garden that you can produce so much throughout the year that even on like 2x2 beds, you can actually feed a family of 4 off of those, depending on how you manage them. So they're substantial. But nonetheless, I always recommend start small and build your way up. So especially if you're new to it, give yourself comfort. Try to get more comfortable with it, and then you can make it bigger as you have the capacity to do so. So start small. That's just a general recommendation. So the dimensions, I would never recommend having your bed wider than 4 feet. And the reason I say that 4 feet, because you can more comfortably reach in 2 feet from either side. Anything wider than that, you're having to like crawl through your garden in order to get to it. But in general, like if you do like a 3x3 bed, that is wonderful. You can make whatever dimensions that you want. The height, I recommend 12 to 18 inches. So you might have to get 2 boards that you stack upon one another for those for the sides. But you could get 12 or 18-inch lumber, but they're usually going to be more costly, of course. And then you can put down, what I would do is the whole garden area, even where I'm going to walk, I'll put down like a weed barrier or just cardboard. And then I put the wood beds on top of those. And then I come back and I will fill everything with soil. And then I'll bring back mulch. So it gives me a place I can like move around pretty easily without having to fight weeds or anything too much in there. But anyway, so when thinking about the wood selection, if you're using wood, really make sure that like the new treated lumber that you can go buy at the store now is safe. Like 15 years ago, before, the treated lumber was not safe. But now our new standards for treated lumber, it's appropriate for your raised beds. You can use untreated lumber as well. Other great examples is, you can use like cedar, black locust, redwood, some of those things that don't break down. They have, they're resistant to that rot and being able to break down over time, but they're more pricey. So I have many times before, I just used untreated pine lumber because it's cheap. And then once every couple of years, you just might have to replace some of the boards here and there. So, and then the nice thing is about that is it's untreated. And then the pine is typically, it's going to be from a sustainable source, which is good. So it's just that continual cost. So ultimately it comes down to you on what you choose. But nonetheless, using that lumber selection, because there is a big question usually about the treated lumber. But if it's the, just the common treated lumber that we have now, that's going to be appropriate. So, and I'll send you more details, of course, on this, on building these beds. So next is soil. So soil, what do we put in it? You know, we don't actually, if you're doing a container garden or a vegetable, like a raised bed garden, we don't recommend just taking soil from a yard and plopping it in, because it might contain pathogens. It might contain nematodes that all of a sudden you're bringing into this sterile environment, relatively sterile environment. So we don't recommend mixing, bringing in just regular soil from your yard right into those. So for like, if you're doing traditional gardening, you know, we always just start off with the soil test, kind of see what your pH and your nutrient level is, and you can add amendments and start tilling it in, which is wonderful and just helps build the soil. For raised and container gardens, you can just go buy like just general potting soil, and that works wonderful. You can get it delivered in dump trucks too, depending on the amount that you need. And you can just use potting soil or compost. Sometimes you can mix in vermiculite with it too. That can be beneficial, like a combination of compost and potting soil works well. We used to have like a Mel's Mix mixture. Are any of you familiar with Mel's Mix? It's wonderful. It's like equal part compost, vermiculite, and peat moss. But we no longer recommend it just because peat moss isn't sustainably harvested. So, yes, ma'am.
What do you think about the zoo food that they will donate to you? And do you think that with the animal waste that there's, like when they shoot the animals with antibiotics or something, is that going to mess up the soil? What do you think about that?
Very great question. So the question is essentially is you have the ability to go get manure, whether it be from the zoo, well, livestock like a farm or anything like that. So any type of manure that you end up using in your garden, you want to make sure it's composted. You still need to make sure it's composted. Usually that stuff that you get is going to be composted, but it's also really important is thinking about what have the animals ingested to make sure that those residuals do not end up in your garden, because there are nightmare stories. And that usually is actually the big concern that we have is with herbicides. So if they are like pasture fed cattle, you know, and, you know, they have to spray a certain herbicide because say it's like an invasive species is coming in that's toxic to the livestock, and they spray it, they actually have on those labels saying that like you do not use the manure that comes out of the animals for like a certain time period after this is applied, because you can get that residual herbicide in the manure, and if you bring it into your compost and you mix it in and you bring it in your garden. So you just have to be very aware of the source of manure and how it's been managed to make sure there is nothing residual in it. So it's a concern. So usually you're just buying the compost, but if you know somebody, a great source, you know how it's being managed and it's good, cool, go for it. But it's always, you know, never just take manure from someone and say, I have manure, you know, ask questions. So, because you don't want it to happen, because there have been instances where compost has gone out that's been tainted with manure that had residual herbicide in it, killed everything. So, yes, ma'am.
Just about the zoo food, I mean, it's fantastic as far as fertilizer is concerned. The biggest concern you have with zoo food is the medications that are given to the animals.
Yeah.
Yeah, that have residual. And no, did I ever get sick from it? And I did use it for a few years. But they do heat it to 140 degrees by law
to sterilize it. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So, but it makes sense to ask those questions of those sellers and make sure that you do have safe compost. So sometimes you'll see things that are labeled not for food or not for, you know, certain aspects. Yes, ma'am.
Even 20 years ago, we did see and they introduced different grass seeds and
Yeah. That I mean, that does happen when you get it. You get those. You can bring in that seed bank from somewhere else. It definitely happens. Yeah. So when we talk about what to grow in Nassau County, it was like, what do we grow? You know, what can we actually grow? So we need to consider, or what do you what do we need to consider when planting our gardens? Wildlife, yeah. Yeah, what else? Think about the plants. So like the plants you want to select, wildlife. We'll talk a little about wildlife in the management part. I got a picture of a bunny eating plants. Companion planting, that's a good one. Yeah. So here's one that we need to think about. Here's a hint. Space. Yeah. So plants do, some of our vegetable plants, they do wonderful. Our fruits and vegetables, like someone mentioned companion planting, you know, like the traditional like three sisters planting is really cool. I can send info about that. That's a different story. But plants, if we do put our plants in too close together, you know, we can impact their space that they need to grow in the garden. And when we don't plant them appropriately or they're too tight, then what ends up happening is that can put pressure on those plants, which brings in disease. It can attract pests, and then you're just not going to have a healthy plant. So we need to make sure that we space and plant our things in our gardens appropriately. So one of the easy ways that we can do that when we're thinking about our gardens is the square foot gardening technique. This is an easy thing for raised beds, you know, because we have recommendations for like if you're doing row crops, how the spacing that you need between your rows and between the plantings. And then with our raised beds, we have that square foot gardening. There's a bunch of different resources online, but it's a really great way to plan and organize your garden bed, because it essentially is, we know that certain plants take up a certain amount of square footage. So at a 1 square foot, how many of certain plants can you put in that square foot? So square foot gardening is an easy way to plan and organize your garden. And then you can see in this situation, someone's just running twine along their garden. You can nail in hammers or put a screw in your raised bed. So then those are always there and you can just run a line. I know some people have actually have a lattice that they built that they just lay down when they're planting. And it's like, okay. But it's a super handy way, like I mentioned, to organize and plan our gardens. Because then you can draw the picture and you can say, oh, this year I planted these things here and I planted these things there. And that's going to be important. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So square foot gardening is an easy way for us to plan and organize how we're doing our layouts. So we got some drawings on here. Let me turn off all of these, clear all drawings. All right, sorry. So on the square foot gardening, we understand that there's certain types of the spacing that we need. So here's just an example of some of the common plants, like a basil. You could put 4 of them in 1 square foot and they'll be happy campers. Chives, you can do 9, garlic 4, pepper obviously is going to be larger, but you can put 1 per square foot. Radishes, you can do 16 of those suckers on a square foot. So if you know that you can grow 16 radishes, same with like turnips, you know, unless you're eating a crazy amount of radishes and turnips, 1 square foot is more than enough. Because, and then like tomato, you can do 1, you know, and it says with cage, so you can have it a cage to help it climb up. Same with like winter squash, 1 with stake, 1 square foot. And you don't need it, but this is a little handy tool that like I just eyeball it. I'm like, I just poke like 16 holes in, like seed, cover them up, good to go. But if you really want to get, I've used this in school gardens. These things are kind of fun where the kids, that's a 1 square foot and you just push it down on the soil and all your little holes are there for that specific spacing. So obviously the bullseye in the middle, that's your 1. And then they have the 4, 8, 12, they have a 16 for like radishes, like the red holes that are around it. So it's just a neat way to like visually see it. And it's a cool little tool. So if you're working with kids, they can throw that out. But, you know, that's one unnecessary item. It is fun, but I just eyeball it and it works out well. But square foot gardening is an easy way to organize our gardens. So we think about organization, but then we need to think about planting dates, ideal planting dates. And there's different things that we can plant. You can start your plants from seeds. So you can go find your seed source. We have seed sources all over. You can order them online. You know, if you're trading with friends, you can do that too. But it's always really important to think about pathogens. Was this plant sick? It can be in the seed, and you don't want to bring that into your garden. But it's important to think about planting dates. You can do it as seed, or you can do them as transplants. So you can go get your like little starts that have already kind of like kick-started, or you make your own transplants by starting your seeds indoors, which we can do. We'll do another program about, because then you could be growing hundreds of plants inside and then bloop, bring them outside as transplants. And then, you know, so some examples that are some really good common cool season plants that are perfect to plant this time of year. So beets, you can start planting those September to March. And it takes about 50 to 70 days to harvest from seed, but because of their beets, we don't have the ability to do from start. So not all of them are you're able to do as a start. But broccoli, you can start your broccoli now. You know, it's August to February is its ideal planting dates, and there's the seed and start days to harvest. So you can definitely see that if you start from seed, it's a 75 to 90 day turnaround. It does take a bit to get those broccoli going, but if you start it as if you do it as a start, it's 50 to 70 days. So you can definitely save yourself some time with start, because if you get like a seed start, you know, like those little trays you fill soil and you fill up with seeds, you can get dozens and dozens and dozens of plants started before they go to your garden. And in space, you know, maybe 24 inches by 18 inches, those little trays, you can get all your seeds started for your entire garden. And then once you plant those, you can start your next round too. So it's almost like a cool little, you know, factory of production potentially. But, you know, like Beverly and I, we grew a lot of like peppers recently for our plant sale and for like the kids. So at our office in Callahan, we had a little display and exhibit about growing peppers from seed. So we had some seeds all planted, and we had a little light that would kick on that was on a timer, and we just watched those plants grow, and then we gave them away to the kids at the plant sale. So, but anyway, so for cauliflower, collards, mustard greens, onions, turnips, those are all common plants that we can start to grow. And this is just like some. So one of the things that is wonderful is you have probably all heard like the term, well, y'all know this, coleslaw. So we all coleslaw, that cole, C-O-L-E, comes from like the brassica, that family of plants, which is cole plants. That's like a lot of your leafy greens, so your mustard. So this time of year, it's leafy green season. So you're able to grow a lot of those cole crops and some of other leafy greens. You know, this is just to name a few. And one of the publications I'm going to give you is our Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide. And it has a huge table of all the things you can grow throughout the year. And even at that, that's just the tip of the iceberg. So those are just the common ones. Yes, ma'am. Planting dates. You could do either. Some of those dates, you know, if we're concerned about transplants, sometimes it's best to do seed, sometimes it might be a little bit better to do transplant. It really has to do with timing for our freezes. So, and then the heat. So seeds in the ground, like right now, will probably do a little bit better because they're not having to deal with heat stress. But by the time they get to those first leaves that are starting to come out after germinating, then they're more susceptible to heat stress. So you may want to wait a little bit longer to do your starts because they're not going to get that hit with that heat stress. So, and then also, you know, related is it might be too cold to put in some seeds later on. But what you can do is you can start your seeds indoors. And once you start to warm up, you can start to put those transplants out in the garden. So you're able to kind of like prolong or start your gardening period earlier. And the great example is tomatoes. You can start your tomatoes indoors in like February and start moving them out in like March, April. Same with peppers. So, but here's some other cool season vegetables and fruits that you can begin to grow this time of year. You know, some of the windows are a little bit short, but anyways, like carrots, Chinese cabbage, lettuce, arugula, onion bulbs, they're a little bit later. but peas, potatoes, spinach, strawberry, beans, pole, and bush. Lima, plant those now if you want lima. It's the only time, this is like the only month that we can really do lima beans, but Brussels sprouts, endives, kohlrabi, Swiss chard, tomatoes. We can do tomatoes like February to April, you know, they're like that early spring period. And then, you know, some turnips. And again, this is just to name a few. And how I like to look at it is if you find something cool that you're interested in growing, give it a try. As long as it's not invasive, you know, but in our garden, a vegetable garden, not a big, it's rare that we see that, but nonetheless, it's like, hey, this is a really cool vegetable, you know, or leafy green, or a cool variety of a spinach I've never tried before. I'm going to give it a whirl. Give it a whirl. It's okay. So if it doesn't work, it didn't work. That's cool, you know? So, but then some of our warm season plants, so things that we're going to think about, like when we start to warm up in that spring and summer period, you know, you can do bush and pole beans, corn, cucumber, eggplant, okra. You can do some pepper, squash. Some of our tomatoes, like we have some heat tolerant tomatoes. Like one of my favorite is the Everglade tomato. That is what we call an indeterminate tomato. So it just like keeps on growing and keeps on fruiting. And you cannot keep up with that sucker, but it is delicious. So I used to go and pick those out of the garden. I'd walk around the yard and I'd eat them. So they're just a little cherry tomato. And it's Everglade tomato. So that's one of my favorites. But anyways, you can do watermelon, cantaloupe, sweet potato, Malabar spinach was like a heat tolerant spinach, was really cool. Southern peas, and then Seminole pumpkin. Seminole pumpkin is really cool, but it's the gift that keeps on giving. You put some in your compost pile, guess what? Your compost pile is a Seminole pumpkin. But Seminole pumpkin is really, really cool, and it's tasty, and it's a unique plant to Florida. So I will follow up with a list of that document that goes into more details. And even like on each one of these plants, it'll go over some unique and select recommended varieties of those specific plants as well. So now let's talk a little bit about garden management. So garden management, you know, water. You need to make sure your plants have access to water, whether you're going out there with a hose, you're going out there, like I like the picture in the top right. Someone just has a bucket of water and like a little measuring cup, and they just go out there and pour it out, you know? If you don't have access to water, at least there's a way. But what I would recommend is try to make sure if you do have the ability to use micro irrigation on a timer, that works great because you can kind of just set it to run in the mornings. And then that's perfect for your plants. They're happy campers. Avoid using overhead irrigation, because what ends up happening is typically you're going to be using way too much water than what is needed. And then also what ends up happening is those overhead sprinklers, they can end up, you get too much moisture on the leaves, that can end up pushing and giving fungus within the garden. So, and another thing that's beneficial of like, if we don't have that good spacing or too tight, you don't have enough air circulation, which is that perfect environment for fungus to be able to grow. So water by hand. I mean, I prefer using the micro irrigation on a timer because I can just make sure it's set to run. So when I'm out in the garden, I'm not having to worry about watering, but I can just look for pests and insects and kind of just check on everything. So nutrient management, it's always best to do your nutrient management or your fertilizer application based off of a soil test, especially if you're doing in-ground gardening. But the nice thing is you're typically doing about 2 to 3 light applications as what we call side dressing. So you're just applying it along like the outside of the leaves or around the leaves, the outside of the leaf portion of most of the plants, or along, like you're planting in rows, just along that row. And an important thing is our greens, they benefit from nitrogen. So ammonium nitrate, that's a good nitrogen source for them. But our tuber and root crops, those like a lot of potassium. So you can get some muriate of potash, and that's perfect for them. So those are just things that you can consider, that if those are within the source of your fertilizer. You know, I've done, like fertilizing right at planting, just like a little bit. And then, fish emulsion, I've come back and I just do fish emulsion applications, and usually that's wavy gravy for the garden that I've done. You can use that for a container garden, no problem. But you're using that granular, just those 2 to 3 light applications throughout its growing period. And then you can do adjustments throughout if you're seeing some type of nutrient deficiency, you can try to make some modification. Because as these growing plants, they are very nutrient consumptive. Any questions about nutrient management? Sometimes there's like a lot of questions about that one, but it's with the vegetable garden, it's a little bit, as long as you're doing that regular intervals throughout that growing period of it in the garden, you're all right. So pest management, scout regularly. So go on your garden, look for things, look for issues. If you can stay on top of it early, you're gonna have a successful garden. You know, you can minimize pest pressure. One of the things that I like to do is if you have the space, put pollinator plants around your vegetable garden as well. Because again, attract your beneficial pollinators, of course, but you're also going to be attracting a lot of those beneficial insects that predate on any of the pests in your garden. You know, you can put bluebird box around your house because they will, you know, around the garden, because they will come in and they'll try to munch on some of the things. Because, you know, one of the common pests we see in the garden, especially if you have a tomato hornworm, you know. So if you have a lot of those, that natural control happening, it limits your interventions that you have to do in the garden. So just scout early, scout regularly, treat early. So it's just a matter of like when you're walking through your garden or you're messing with your plants, just inspect them. Just see if there's anything irregular. Look for those insect damage. Look for what can be concern of a nutrient deficiency, or what could be concerned of maybe some like fungal pathogen, or check for your bunnies that might be eating your plants. But it's important to think about rotating plants. Rotate your plants. I'll talk about like more why in a second, but this is a great benefit when I was talking about square foot gardening. No, if you map out where you're putting things, never put the same plant in the same spot multiple times in a row. That's bad news. We'll talk about it in a second. But anyways, so rotating your plants is going to be an important part of helping with pest management in your garden. But there's also some really safe organic, safe insecticides or pesticides that we can use. It's like insecticidal soaps. Not Dawn dish soap mixed with water, but specialized insecticidal soaps. Neem oil, that's a very common one. You can get like copper fungicide spray, that works wonderful. BT, which is Bacillus, it's a bacteria that helps manage soft body insects, or like or larvae for like caterpillars that might end up in your garden. So, but also you can definitely see, like in this image on the right, you can see that someone just put a mesh screen over their garden. That keeps out pretty much everything. You know, if you have if you're concerned about white flies, if you're concerned about aphids, or if you're concerned about Mr. Bunny coming along and munching on your stuff, you can protect it pretty well. But that does take a little bit more extra oomph. If you have bigger animals, one thing that I think is always really fun is a motion sensor sprinkler that kicks on at night. So if the deer come along, they get in that garden, your sprinklers kick on and it sprays them and woo, you know, scares them off. So yes, ma'am.
I've also heard that cayenne pepper
Mm-hmm.
around the outside edge of the garden, there are a lot of deer in particular will the scent.
Yeah.
Just doesn't hold. So when it rains, it messes things up. But you can buy those nice big ones at any of like the Sam's, Costco kind of place, and put it around your garden, and they just stay away. Yeah,
cayenne pepper is like, you just sprinkle it around. It can be a good way to kind of deter some of the larger animals. And we actually have a document I'm going to include to everybody that is like the organic pest management for backyard gardening. And that talks about using that as kind of like a deterrent. So not it's going to be prohibited. It's not going to keep them away, but it makes it helps a little bit. So, but if you like the smell of cayenne pepper, it's wonderful. So. But anyways, pest management, it's just making sure that you're just aware, because the minute that you're gone for more than a week, that's when they come. Like they know you're coming on vacation. They know, they're listening. But this is why you rotate plants. Nematodes. Have any of you ever had to deal with nematodes before? Yeah. Ugh. So nematodes, if you're unaware what a nematode is, you probably heard that term from your high school biology class years ago, or college, or whatever you've learned. But they are microscopic. You can't see them with the naked eye. So I've had people reach out. I see nematodes all over my garden. I'm like, no, you do not. I don't say it that way. No, but they're microscopic. So and specifically, and then obviously there are some nematodes that you can see, but not these. These are so tiny where you can literally get a spoonful. They're microscopic. You can get a spoonful of your soil, and theoretically in that spoonful, there's probably millions of nematodes. They are tiny. There's one underneath an electron microscope. You can see on that image. So there are nematodes everywhere. They are in everything in the world, nematodes are everything. But are they bad? No. There are two that we're really concerned ourselves with, and that's when the population gets beyond a certain threshold. And the big one that we concern ourselves with is called root knot nematode. Root knot nematode, you can see its damage. It's what we call also generally a parasitic nematode. So what ends up happening is they're piercing, they have these little piercing mouth parts where they move up to the plant roots and they're like, ooh, tasty. Boom. And they stick their little proboscis in there and start sucking out the goodies. It creates these swelling nodules all over the roots, screws up the plant, hurts the plant, kills the plant pretty much, loses productivity. Do you all know like the number one plant that is susceptible to nematodes? Tomatoes. Yeah. If you have a tomato, never plant your tomato in the same spot. You will get nematodes. So they're microscopic. We can't see them, but we can look at how if we're having decline in our plants and we're not sure why, there's a good chance that maybe we have nematodes. Then we need to think of, okay, soil management. What are we doing to our soil? If we have happy, healthy soil, we have happy, healthy plants. So the best strategy is rotate plants. You move plants around, the nematodes, they're really targeting specific plants. So if we move those plants around, the population can never get to a threshold that ends up being problematic to our plants. So rotate plants. You can integrate marigolds. There's some thought, in the science where if you interplant some marigolds throughout your garden, that can help deter them. But the most effective way is, how many of you like gardening in the heat of the summer? No hands? I don't blame you. So solarize, that is the best. Solarization essentially is you're cooking your soil throughout the summer. It takes about 60 days, 30 to 60 days, but you can see the fellow on the bottom left, he's laying down a clear plastic, usually about 6 millimeters is all you need. Not a black plastic, but it has to be a clear plastic. And you just lay that down over the garden and you seal the edges with you just put soil all around the edge, because what you're doing is you're creating a little greenhouse. You're letting the light in, heats up the soil, and the heat stays trapped. So it starts heating up the soil. And what ends up happening is you're cooking the nematodes, or they work their ways down further into the soil. So this is a great strategy if you're like, I don't want to work my garden this summer. It's too hot. I'm not going to worry about it. The train is here. So welcome to Yulee. I'll wait a second until it passes because I don't want it to disrupt the recording audio. So, whoop. It's going through. Huh. The more you know. That's good. So, anyways, sorry, our train just went by. But anyway, so solarize. That is going to be, if you don't want to work your garden in the summer because it gets too hot, and you just want to, hey, I'm just going to let it lay fallow for a little bit. There's other strategies you can do, but to help prevent nematodes, or if you have a nematode issue, in the summer, you solarize. It won't be effective in the winter. You have to do it in the summer. It's not going to get hot enough in the winter. So the nice thing about a raised bed or a container garden is you can just replace the soil. So, but if you're in ground, you can. Obviously, it's really easy to lay the plastic out over a raised bed, but to a certain extent, it's easy just to, in a container, just dump the soil. If you have a lot of beds, you don't have to do every bed. It could be one that's just problematic that you can solarize. But the nice thing about those raised beds or those containers is you can just do a complete soil replacement, and that's perfect. But in ground, that's harder to do, or like traditional gardening, it's harder to do. So solarizing as part of that management may just be a good thing to consider throughout the season. So yes, ma'am.
summer, what I've been experimenting with is the no-till method too, because it's like when you till the nematodes up.
So yes, it is always a concern, tilling the nematodes up, but it just depends on if there's that impact of that nematode issue, because the nematodes are there already. So you're more concerned about, has that condition already been created in which the nematode population is now exceeding it, and through poor management practices, you'll have a high nematode population. But we will talk a little bit about that no-till here in a second, in a little bit. So pathogens. So pathogens is part, this is like our diseases. These are our fungus. Like whitefly comes or disease, like viruses. There's like a given. So, but the best way to manage them is to avoid the problems in the first place, or the conditions that create them in the first place. So avoid overhead watering, like we mentioned earlier, because if things stay wet all the time, then that's going to create that perfect environment for fungus to proliferate and to grow. Water in the early morning. So any excess of moisture that we have can dry, and it just essentially allows that, it eliminates that period of moisture be hanging on the plants. Remove any diseased leaves, but it's important to think about sanitation. One of the best ways to spread your diseases around your plants isn't necessarily the insects. It's your hands, your pruning shears. We spread just as much, those diseases just as much as some of those insects do. So, but removing diseased leaves and just put them in the trash, don't put them in the compost, because some of those pathogens, depending on what they are, they can be soil borne, they can hang out in the soil. And then the minute you bring that compost back in, you're bringing that pathogen back in. Most fungicides are good protectants, like copper fungicide, neem oil is pretty helpful. Some of the common fungal pathogens that we can see is like Alternaria leaf spot, xanthomonas, or just what we call black rot, and then rhizoctonia. Rhizoctonia, have you ever seen like dampening off, like a plant might fall over? Essentially, it's a fungus that's happening at the base of the plant. But anyways, these are common pathogens that we do see, but it's just avoidance by making sure that best management so we don't get to this condition. Is it 100% unavoidable? No, but we know what to be on the lookout for. Yes, sir.
How do the fungicide?
So good question about the fungicide. So the question is, how do those fungicides impact our butterflies, et cetera? So like copper fungicide, as long as you're following that label, you're avoid direct contact, especially with those beneficials. Neem oil, that's the one that you still got to be very careful with. It's technically an organic, it is an organic pesticide, but with a neem oil, it's going to impact any type of insect that it does have direct contact with. So you just need to be aware. Usually some of those applications you're not doing them in the middle of the day. You don't want to do that in the middle of the day anyways, because that's when the population, like a lot of those pollinators, are most active. So if you do it in the morning or in the evening, you usually have the better. Yeah. So, but some of the pesticides that we do have, if they're like systemic, that spread throughout the plant, that's going to have impacts, and that's all going to be on those labels, on those risks, and the best application timing. So, but yeah, so pesticide systemics, we're spreading it all throughout the plant. That can have residuals that appear with the nectar, and so those are the ones you have to be very careful on. So. Yeah, there's sometimes you can have some residual effects, but it's pretty minor. So yeah, but how I consider it is a pesticide's a pesticide. Apply according to the label to minimize any type of impact. But if we follow what we call integrated pest management by managing our gardens appropriately, allowing for that biological control to happen, what's that mechanical control, like removing diseased plants by manually, sanitation. It's not often that we get to that point where we need to put any type of pesticide down. So that's our last ditch effort as part of that and that's intervention, which is the last ditch effort, which you shouldn't technically get to unless just poor management has occurred. So yes, ma'am.
Also not spraying the flowers themselves.
Right. So there sometimes might be there might sometimes be a condition where the spraying the flower might be necessary, because if you have a bad thrip population, you might have some thrips, and that's disease. In some sort of situation, it might just be take out that plant if the thrips are pretty bad. So like my citrus tree used to have, an old citrus tree, I don't have one now, used to have thrips that will always get in the flower. It drove me nuts, but I just let it be. So, but anyways, yeah. So, but anyway, so the pathogens, thinking about that, best management practices is going to reduce any type of need that we really have for any type of direct intervention that would require a pesticide. So then when it comes to harvesting, we harvest just when we think the plants look good. You know, when that plant looks best, you know, like if you're going to the grocery store, that's when you harvest it. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to see with like the turnips, things that are in the ground. So usually you're counting your days and waiting as long as possible before you harvest them. Or if you have 16 radishes, you can just pull one up and say, nope, you know. But you can, I have put a radish back in the ground, did fine. But anyways, so, but the really cool thing is, you know, you can, once you harvest, in that square foot, you can bring back some more compost, amend the soil a little bit, reintroduce a new plant in that spot, but track where you're planting things. Always track where you're planting things. And a really cool thing about leafy greens is when you're harvesting them, they are the gift that keeps on giving. Because if you harvest the old leaves, just the bottom leaves, they'll keep growing and growing and growing. Like I've seen kale get like this tall before. They're like 4 feet tall because people just harvest the older leaves throughout the season. It keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. And as long as you're harvesting, it won't do this. Boop. Bolt. It won't bolt, which is wonderful. But if the minute you stop, it's gonna bolt. And once it bolts, that's it. You know, you can probably like, you notice it's like, oh no, it bolted. Go harvest what you can. That'll be good enough. It'll be fine. But it ends up impacting, that's bok choy, I believe, but it ends up impacting just the flavor and the quality of it. But also you can let your plants bolt, which is cool. When it's done, it's towards the end of the season, let them bolt because they're just going to flower. You're gonna attract some pollinators, cool. And then harvest the seeds, you know, collect those seeds and all of a sudden you have a great, especially if those plants kicked butt that year. It's like, oh man. So obviously that's way more seeds than you'll need. I mean, shoo, but like say you have 2 or 3, like if you had a huge bed like that, you know, and you had 2 or 3 that were just outstanding, remove the rest and just let the others go to seed, harvest them, collect the seeds when they're ready, you know, store them. And then you got a great library to kind of pull from for that next planting season, or depending on the timing, you can just replant them again. So look for bolting, but once it's bolted, that's it. So beat the heat with garden tips. Solarize. If it's hot outside, solarize. If you don't want, we talked about that as part of nematode management. Throw that clear plastic down. I'll make sure I send out the specific recommendations, but you're just putting down that clear plastic to let that light in, and you seal the edges, and that can help with nematode management. You can do warm season vegetables if you want, like okra kicks butt in the middle of the summer. You can do some sweet potatoes in the middle of summer. Some of your southern peas do wonderful in the middle of the summer. There's a lot of things you can grow, but then, you know, if you don't want to be outside in the middle of the summer, you know, it may not be always the best. But then the last one is what we call green manure. Green manure is a great thing. It's just a ground cover. You know how farmers and producers, it's like, we're going to do a ground cover. And what you do is you just come back and you're thinking about how do you build healthy, happy soil. Green manures can do it. Is you can sow your garden, whether it be in ground like that traditional, you can do it in a raised bed really easily. And you just let those grow. You'll have pollinators galore. And then at the end of the season, you just knock them down. Just knock them down. They break down in your garden. You, as like a no-till method, you just knock them down. It helps build organic matter in the soil. And that happy, healthy organic matter, that's where the moisture and the nutrients all love to hang out and makes the plants happy. You can till them in also, depending on if you're going to plant immediately after they grow. But it's a great method to do that no-till method if you didn't want to. But anyways, that green manure, and I'll send you a whole list of plants which work well as green manure, but some of them like sunflowers, those are great. There's some legumes that we can do, like sun hemp is another one that's really handy. Or even in the middle of the winter, if you had some that you didn't want to, we have some really cool ground covers like clovers that you can mix in and till in and all of that stuff that help break down. Yes, ma'am.
So in my raised bed that I grew collard greens and really kept growing,
Yeah.
I should go in and just chop the remaining whatever's up and just let it lay there and maybe sprinkle some extra new soil on top.
So if you have some like residual plant material that's in your garden, you can theoretically, if it is pathogen free, because you don't want to till anything in that might have a pathogen, you can
Well,
knock it
yes,
down.
I just made a raised bed out of pallets.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be perfect. So yeah, you can knock those down and have them, they'll break down, but if they do have any signs of a pathogen on them, I wouldn't do that. So you just won't unintentionally keep that pathogen
But
there.
now do
But-
I need to put a plastic tarp over it? I mean, we're talking about collard green seeds, so it's already seeded.
Yeah.
Chop
So
it
if
up.
you have those collard green seeds in there, I mean, it'd be ideal if you collected them.
Right.
'Cause,
Well, I mean, they're still hanging out. And
Mhm.
I didn't know whether to pick them or just chop them and let them grow.
Either or. Yeah, you could pick them or chop them down or let them go, because right now would be a good time to put in some collards too. But that's ultimately up to you. But the plastic we're beyond the laying down plastic for solarization, because we start to wane this month
Will
in
it
our
kill the
heats.
seeds if we heat 'em up
Not
like that?
always, but sometimes it will. Yeah. So solarization can also be a good management practice for weed to help control weeds. So one of the questions I had online is, in a no-till method with green manure, are you suggesting just leave plant material on top of the bed? Yes. Yeah, you just knock it down. You can till it in, you can chop it up. In a pure no-till method, you just knock it down. Now, some people do like a semi-till, where they'll knock it down. They can, like what we also call chop and drop, where you mix it in the top like 12 inches of the soil, just so you have that good mixture and it breaks down. But pure no-till method is just knocking it over and let it go. So, and a lot of our farmers are doing that too, which is really cool, as a way to help protect soil. So we've talked about the planning and managing or designing a vegetable garden, those basics. What do you need? How do you think about sunlight, building that bed? What type of garden do you want to have? What's your capacity that you have? We talked about those fall plantings. So we're coming into the best, most robust period of time to do our vegetable gardening, which is really exciting. And then garden management, we talked about the basics on make sure you're watering, nutrient management, pest management, how to manage specifically nematodes. But one of the biggest things, at least with that pest management, make sure you have a healthy garden, think about your soil, and also solarization or rotating your plants around. If there's one thing that I make sure you take away from today, is rotate your plants, because that's going to help you out a lot. So, and if you have a container, just plop them out and replace the soil. But it'd be still ideal in, you don't really see it in container gardens. It's rare. Some of the pathogens pests that we can get in a container garden aren't going to be as numerous as a raised bed or traditional, but still the best management, treat it all the same. So we should have covered these essential questions. You should feel a little bit more comfortable answering these. So how do I plan to design my vegetable garden? What are common vegetables and fruits to grow in Nassau County? So we just covered some of the basics. You know, we can spend all day talking about one specific genus of plant that we can grow in our garden, but and then how do I manage my vegetable garden? So the basic management practices. So essentially what you should now have is enough knowledge to make you dangerous. So anyways, always feel free to reach out to us. Here's my contact information. Our main office is currently in Callahan at the fairgrounds, but we're just waiting now to find this. Soon we'll be in our new property that's over on Minor Road. So we will be out of the Yulee office here at that point. But until then, but regardless, that is my contact information. So you can always feel free to reach out to me, reach out to our Master Gardener volunteers. We love to help you out, troubleshoot, figure out those best steps that we can recommend as part of our science-based recommendations that we get through our research. But I know we're a little bit past 11 now, but I want to make sure y'all have been asking great questions about the program, which is wonderful. But we still have some opportunity to ask some questions, especially for anybody else that is online.
When Minor Road